Welcome everyone, it's time for some news. Yesterday we left each other with the last of the role inspections of 9.2 with the melee DPS, so now it's time to go back and go over some of the news that Blizzard developers kept giving us regarding 10.0. So there was a pretty large Q&A being answered from Blizzard devs regarding the talent system, which is this entire thing right here, which we're going to be reading together. No, of course, I'm not gonna be your personal tutor and read you this entire wall of text. Don't be fucking lazy and read it for yourself. I am just gonna give you the best part, okay, the best of what was pointed out in this Q&A for the talent system. So first, let's go with the obvious, what we have pointed out a couple of days ago as well, which is the fact that the passive abilities are the circles, the squares are the abilities themselves, and the hexagons shaped ones are the multi-choice options in your talent tree. That's the first basic info about the talent system. But where is more? Okay, the more is that, of course, the talent system starts at level 10 once you choose your specialization. This is obvious. Another thing is that you're gonna have 61 total points at max level, which is of course level 70 in Dragonflight. With these 61 points, you will be able to put 31 in your class, so in your default class talent tree, and then 30 points in your spec tree. What is worth mentioning is that they are split, okay? You're gonna be gaining different talent points for both of the trees. You're not gonna be gaining 61 points total and you can spend them wherever you want. You're gonna be earning, by the time you get to max level, exactly 31 points for your class tree and 30 points for your spec tree. Another thing that people thought about is, well, if we are going back to a more classic style of talents, does this mean we can split it into something like a 21-3-27 talent build for our spec? No, even though we are back to a talent tree, the tree available is only going to be the one for your chosen spec. So if you're a mage, your options are going to be mage and fire, or mage and frost, or mage and arcane. You can't just randomly split your talent points across multiple specializations. Another point is that passives are the only ones that can have multiple talent ranks. This also kind of obvious, right? Your good old increase your critical strike chance by 1%, all the way up to 5%. Of course, in this talent tree, these multiple ranks are bound to be much more meaningful than before. Another thing you might be thinking is, are we getting all of our power in the talent for our spec, in the tree for our spec, and then all of the utility stuff in the class-based talent tree? The answer was not exactly, not really. The answer was, we are planning to put most of the power in your spec tree. There's going to be quite a lot of utility and CC, interrupts, stuns, and various other benefits for your spec in the class tree, but not all. Some of these are still going to be power increases. Not that it matters too much, since you are locked in the amount of points you can spend there anyways. It's not that you can say, oh well, there is no power in my default druid talent tree, so I'm gonna spend all my points in my balance tree. You can't, because you only have 30 points in your balance tree anyways. So you have to put those 31 points in your class tree somewhere. Another thing that was pointed out by the devs in the Q&A was that they are going to go back at making some returns of things like artifact traits, things like legendary effects, things like tier set bonuses. All of this might be put together in one big pot and be shared across the talent trees. This might also mean, of course, that some things might, rather than return, might simply move away, might simply be removed to make space for these new things. These new things that right now basically are borrowed powers, and in previous expansions have been borrowed powers. That was the main recap related to the talent tree and how it's going to be working. But then we had another thing. This one was the interview from Ion Azikostas with Hazelnutty Games, which I'm gonna leave you the link behind. You should go and watch the interview yourself, unless you're lazy as shit and want to be told everything in a much shorter manner. What was being told there by Ion were a few interesting things. One was, again, about the talent tree and why exactly did they go back to this system, but not quite like the old days of vanilla, TBC, Wrath. His example to the problem that those talent trees had was the fact that as they kept expanding the talent trees, like you went from vanilla into TBC into rat, and they just kept getting deeper and deeper and deeper. The problem is that at the end of the day, you were still just expanding your main tree. If you are a fire mage, you put your 20 points into frost or into arcane to reach whatever key other spell or passive you wanted there, and then you just kept diving down into the fire tree. Every expansion essentially was just 10 more points you were putting down into the fire tree. It's not that much was changing. So, as a way to make it more meaningful and also to make it more viable and sustainable over time, what if we just don't split the trees? Since otherwise people would be dumping all the points they can in their main spec, why don't we just make them one for the class, one for their spec, so that we can just make it even and balanced across the two. And if there is a next expansion and we can expand this talent tree system, players won't just continue to dump all their points into their main talent tree and make it much more monotonous. With this system, it's going to be much more well balanced as a talent setup. What this also means is, of course, that this is planned to replace the idea of borrowed powers, right? This way, you don't need the soulbind, you don't need the legendary, you don't need the conduits or the good older borrowed powers from BFA. Could be Azerite traits, could be the Benthic gear, the corruption levels. This type of talent setup can work for multiple expansions. They are planning to make it work and be still a power source of the characters, even in further expansions, even in following expansions. That being said, this is something worth remembering, and Ion made sure to point this out. It's not that because we have this talent system, which is planning and its purpose is to replace many of these multiple systems of borrowed powers, it doesn't mean that borrowed powers go away completely, okay? It doesn't mean that the moment you hit max level in Dragonflight and you max out your talent tree, that is all the power you're going to get until the entirety of the expansion is over. There are still going to be borrowed powers being released, one of which, of course, as we said a few minutes ago, is the tier sets. That is also a borrowed power that is going to come and be available. So they are not ruling out the fact that self-contained things, particularly patch by patch, tier by tier, are not going to be there anymore. They probably will, but they're not definitely going to be as impactful. Because, of course, a lot of your power will be in the talents, and also they made sure to point out that stuff like legendaries, stuff like this random RNG super power up is not going to be a thing. Even if we do get borrowed powers, it's not going to be a thing. Talking about borrowed powers, this is the reason why we are not getting Dragon Covenant abilities for this particular reason, so that you're not going to lose them the next expansion. With also what they announced was going to be in Dragonflight, our next point, which is RENOWN. We already pointed out and said a couple of days ago that RENOWN was going to be in Dragonflight, but it's not going to be like the RENOWN of Shadowlands. You're not going to have a Covenant system and locking perks and features behind RENOWN, which is going to be limited Covenant by Covenant, Dragonflight by Dragonflight, so you have to grind all of them one by one, and they're only going to become easier to climb later on, much later on, kind of like how it happened in Shadowlands. The TLDR as to why RENOWN exists in Dragonflight is to replace Reputation. That is the TLDR. Reputation bars, going from neutral to friendly to honor to revered into exalted, is old, is rusty, is outdated. The point is that it doesn't quite show you your progress. It's just a bar. It's gonna take weeks of weeklies and dailies, and the rewards are also kind of iffy. You have to go to a quartermaster to buy your reward, which is a very old style of playstyle. Basically in vanilla it was like that, and now it's the same almost 20 years later. So their idea is that to simply take a faction, make it work with rep like it normally would, except you put this rep into the shape, into the form of RENOWN levels. That is basically the TLDR. There is still not going to be any player power. There is still not going to be anything you can gain that isn't cosmetic. Perhaps at the very best, you're going to be getting some patterns and recipes for your professions, but that's it. Rest is going to be the usual. Mounts, toys, pets, tabards, and whatever else. And of course, Ion points out that the loot, there is going to be gear for players who don't Mythic Plus or don't trade, so low-ish item level gear from the Reputation faction, but Renown is going to be essentially overtaking the way Reputation bars have worked up to this point, at the very least in the Dragonflight expansion. The last point of these news and these Q&As being released left and right is Mythic Plus, and the news, which is the talk of the day, about splitting Mythic Plus and not giving us all the content at release. So this has been the main complaint and the main debate about the info. So Dragonflight launches, you get 4 Dragonflight dungeons and 4 Mists of Pandaria dungeons. And then Season 1 comes in 4 months later, you get the other 4 Dragonflight dungeons and 4 Worlds of Draenor dungeons. Then you go back to 4 dungeons from Dragonflights, the ones you had at the start of the expansion, and then pair them together with the, Cataclysm dungeons for Mythic Plus. And this is obviously the debate, because some people are saying, I am paying money for the game, I want all of the content available immediately. Why should I pay full price when you took the time to develop 4 dungeons and I don't even get them in Mythic Plus? The other point is that this is much better, because one of the bigger complaints about Mythic Plus is that you're gonna be doing the same dungeons forever. I just completed a Necrotic Wake key. That is the same Necrotic Wake I have completed a year and a half ago when the expansion launched. If we have this system, you're gonna be having a much more refreshing time to go tier by tier, season by season, a more exciting time, because you will get things back. Now, obviously, this would be a problem if the dungeons were just 4, right? Because that's just too little. If you cut Shadowlands dungeons in half and you got them, half of them every season, it would still feel bad. So to not make it feel like you have not enough of them, they are adding the older dungeons converted into a Mythic Plus dungeon. And that is the other complaint. Many people say this is boring because they are old dungeons, they are recycled content. Others are happy because they wanted in the first place Blizzard to start reusing content that was good but was left behind, or because they simply like the idea of seeing old nostalgic dungeons being put into a more modern setting. Now, this is obviously much more of a question of preference, whichever one of the two styles you enjoy. In my case, I am very positive towards this, mostly because I never bought the excuse to consider these older dungeons from older expansions as recycled content, mostly because I just went and reminded myself that I haven't done Mists of Pandaria dungeons in years. I can barely remember the boss's abilities faintly, and pretty much have no resemblance whatsoever of the trash packs and the trash mobs. Having those dungeons elevated to Mythic Plus also means they are getting an overhaul. They are getting their trash changed, their trash added, the route of the dungeon will be changed to make up for the Mythic Plus standards. Very likely bosses will be changed, will be having added abilities and be made harder, of course, to be in line with Mythic Plus difficulty. So it's not that you remind yourself running half AFK through some Worlds of Draenor dungeon and that's the equivalent of having it in Dragonflight. It's not going to be the same experience whatsoever. So yeah, this can still be more subjective of a point. I still think it's nice. I still think it's going to play out to be a good point, especially also for loot. Another complaint wasn't just we are doing the same dungeons every season. The other complaint was there is going to be one best in slot trinket, and that's going to be the best in slot trinket for the entire expansion, because Mythic Plus keeps scaling, resetting every season and increasing in item level every season, which means if your best in slot trinket is the inscrutable quantum device, you have to farm the other side every single season, every single patch to get that trinket. This way it would be at the very least half as much at best, because now dungeons are going to rotate, new dungeons are going to come in, perhaps you're going to be getting new, better trinkets or rings or even weapons, and it's going to become more refreshing. That's why I think it's better overall to have this split system, rather than just getting all of the new dungeons at first and then old dungeons later on. To start with a mix, I think is a better idea. However, as I said, this is much more subjective compared to the other points. So I'm going to leave you, I'm going to close the video exactly with this question: which one of the two styles you would prefer as far as Mythic Plus and dungeon releases go in Dragonflight. For the moment, however, this is all we have, all of the news we have gotten in the last few days of the reveal of the expansion, so I'm going to leave you to the rest of the start of your weekend. Thank you, of course, for watching the video and for helping to grow and support the channel. You can contribute more by liking and commenting on the video, as well as subscribing to the channel. This time around, given that it's a joyous time of news for the next expansion and everyone is happy, I'm not gonna bar anyone from subscribing to the channel. You can of course also find me on Twitter as well, and you can of course support me even more by checking out my Patreon over here, which will also get you access to my Discord channel as well. The main goal is still to do something about my throat, besides little sweet gums to soothe my throat. Besides this, we are done. Thank you guys for watching. See you guys soon. And in the meantime, no, but really, how much of a diagonal rain must have come to rain inside? Ah, shit.